So, hello, I'm Brian Filato from the University of South Florida, and my colleague Benita Pollack will be coming along a little later. And our presentation today, I'm winter, and Benita is going to lead you into spring. So I get to tell you about all the problems, and then Benita will tell about how we tried to find out some of the solutions for it. So, let's see. Okay, there we go. So, say a little bit about the University of South Florida. You see the bull statue on the left? That is our symbol, so maybe we're all full of bull. I don't know. But anyways, I'll see after we make our presentation. Let's see, and that's the thing. We have 3 campuses of USF. Anita and I worked on the Tampa campus. That was the original one. But if you cross Tampa Bay, we have one in St. Pete. Going farther south, one in Sarasota. And a little timeline on USF. We were authorized by the state legislature, final approval from the Department of Education in 1956, and we have the distinction of being the first public university built from scratch in the 20th century. 1960 is when we actually opened in Tampa with a little under 2,000 students. We had our St. Pete campus in 65. 71, we got our medical program started on the Tampa campus, and in 75, our Sarasota campus opened. Now, in 2018, we have over 50,000 students enrolled. Our libraries, the print volumes have grown to over 2.5 million, but our real focus these days is on e-resources. So in addition to the 939 databases, we have millions of eBooks. And when I did a count, just doing a null search in our catalog for eBooks, we got over 1,150,000. But that continues to grow because we're always adding new ones. And our library expenditure is over 8,700,000. So what I mentioned about eBooks are the big thing, e-resources in general, particularly the eBooks. And when you have 3 campuses, you've got so many students, the idea of being able to have books that can circulate to many people at the same time, and they don't necessarily have to come to the campus to get the book, that was an attractive thing. We first really started getting into eBooks through consortial purchase in 2008, which was through the Florida Academic Library Services Cooperative, which is the state agency that coordinates the library automation and the public catalogs for all the state universities in Florida. We got the books from the net library, as it was called then, of course, EBSCO now. We decided then we would go on our own and do greater exploration of that. We started 2009 with the Patron Driven Acquisition program from what's now eBook Central. And publishers started offering the evidence-based acquisitions models, which gives the librarians a little more control over the actual purchase. And so in 2013, we started with Wiley. We now have 7 of the EBA programs, plus our PDA program. And then we just buy ebooks that people want that aren't in the collections, or for some reason we didn't get through these EBAs. So all the ebooks, a focus on that served us well when the legislature came along in 2008. And they responded to constituents' requests for doing something to reduce the cost of textbooks for students. And so, 2008, they put in the statutes that each of the state universities and colleges have to do things that will reduce the cost of the textbooks. Policies, procedures, guidelines are further efforts to minimize the cost of textbooks. By 2016, they decided, okay, we're really serious. You've got to prove you're doing something, and so you've got to send a report every year to the state that shows exactly what you're doing to further these efforts to reduce the cost of the textbooks. So we thought, okay, we've got all these ebooks, and we think it's a good idea to reduce the cost of textbooks. How do we get to professors to really know all the textbooks that we have that they can adopt for their class? So of course we have everything in a catalog, but as you'll see, that's a problem. So the solution that we find out, that Benita will tell you about in a little bit, is our eBooks for the Classroom Plus. But starting out in our catalog, Mango is our public access catalog that's sponsored by FALSI, that's managed by FALSI. We also have a discovery layer, Find It from EBSCO. We load all our eBooks into both the OPAC and our discovery layer. But there's still a lot of problems, no matter where they are, with ebook records when you're getting them in batches from vendors. Part of the thing is that you look at the catalog, you're not going to find something that will show you precisely all of the books that are available. You can go to a vendor's website, you can find a book. If you look for it in a catalog, you won't find it because there isn't like a real-time thing. As soon as an ebook becomes available, we get the marked record. So that's a big problem right there. Another one is when we have to go to the vendor sites to get the records. It can be a challenge. We have to figure out, okay, what do we have to do to get the records? We don't want to load everything every time. How do we limit it to the ones that are new that we need? But then just the way things are set up, sometimes you still don't know. Do we really have everything? And then we get an issue with the individual records. And we found that URLs, which obviously are extremely important with eBooks, there were a lot of problems with that. One of the things was the URL that is on the record doesn't necessarily take you to the book that's described on the record. Like if we buy a book series, for instance, and we get the different volumes, and for instance, that great series, Adventures in Metadata. So say the record says that it's volume 26 of Adventures in Metadata. Well, when you go to the URL, what comes up is volume 24 of Adventures in Metadata. And we found that with several things. Well, I don't think that's an actual series, Adventures in Metadata. But with real series, that has been the case. We have found out. To our dismay in trying to figure out, okay, we tried to do various programs to see if we could do it, try to fix the URLs. And there's other ones too. The problem is when you get records, sometimes if there are similar titles, for whatever reason, people aren't paying attention. The URL that's put on the record does not necessarily agree with the description of the book. You might have a book that says it's Getting Around in Charleston, South Carolina. You go to the URL, what we get is Getting Around in Charleston, West Virginia. And so there are things like that. When you have sets, like multiple volumes on a set, the Loeb Classical Library online loves to do that. There may be like an 8-volume set on the record. When we got them from OCLC, we found out that although the record says it's 8 volumes in a set, we see on the record there's only one URL, because the way they were doing it was that each record would have a single URL, and they would do the same exact description on the record, but there'd be a different URL for each. So we had to figure out what to do with that, and we thought if we put them all on one record, that would be better, but that's also a lot of work that's involved. To top that off, too, we also have the ones that are more particular to the state and to USF. We have so many EBA programs that inevitably you're going to have the same title from different vendors. And if you're trying to get a record from each vendor, of what we have, the problem is that if we got it from Collection Manager, you might get the record from one vendor, and then they'll say in OCLC that we hold the title, and so we don't get the records from the other vendors that it may be available from. So we have to track that down and try to figure out about that. There's also a situation in particular in Florida where a few years ago, the state universities went to what we call a shared bib catalog system, where all of the universities that would have a title would be on the same bibliographic record. They put their own holding, but they'd use just one record. The problem is when loading that, the software that was constructed by FALSI for us to load the eBooks in this system, it was set up so that you wouldn't be able to overlay a record, the actual descriptive content. You could not overlay that. You could add your particular URL, but not overlay the content, because they worry about, well, you could wipe things out and like that, which was a valid concern. The problem was sometimes you only get brief records in a catalog, and then they'll come along, okay, this is a much better record. The problem is we can't add the much better record, and so some of that metadata that would be in the improved record is lost because we have loaded the original record. So with all of these problems, we decided, is there a better way? Because the faculty really can't get an accurate view of the available titles if we want them to choose our eBooks to adopt for their classroom. You can't just go to a catalog, let me see all the ones that we have on my particular subject. When you've got over 1 million records, browsing isn't a real thing. And with subjects too, even if you do a subject search, you just get so many. It doesn't really work out well. And we thought if we really want to have the faculty adopt this and really get in compliance with the textbook affordability and really show that we're making efforts, we need another way to do things. So what we came up with was the eBooks for the Classroom Plus project, which Benita is now going to tell you about.
My name is Benita Pollack. I'm the Metadata Librarian at the University of South Florida. And my colleague Xiying and I have been working for the past year to develop a workflow for updating the eBooks for the classroom database, as well as standardizing some of the metadata. I'm going to go through a brief history of the eBooks for the classroom database and describe how it operates, and then I'm going to walk you through our metadata collection process and our standardization efforts, and then finally we're going to look at some recommendations and suggestions we have for improving the database. So our e-resources librarian originally got this idea from UNC Charlotte and Louisiana State, who both have ebook databases as well, and they were kind enough to share some of their code and procedures with us. So basically, we decided to put all of our ebooks in a database that the faculty could access and use to adopt ebooks to use in their classroom in place of textbooks. So we have some additional features in our ebook database that aren't in the standard library catalog. Our database went live in March of 2017, and we have an ebook database data management team that consists of 7 members. And it takes 4 of us approximately 3 to 4 months to run through all of our vendors and update the database once. So a lot of our process right now are manual, and we're looking to automate them because it takes almost 100 hours. We have over 600,000 ebooks in the database. We only load unlimited simultaneous users, and they have to be printable and downloadable. Some are whole books, some are chapters, some are page by page. So we do have DRM information in our database as well. We run 7 EBA PDA programs. Well, we have 6 EBA and then the 1 PDA. And then on top of that, we have 23 other vendors where we get purchase and subscription titles from that are all loaded in the database. Then we also added open access titles. We have the Open Textbook Network and Knowledge Unlatched in the database, and a few of the other vendors who have open access titles we've loaded. The last thing we put in the database were certain vendors we load unowned titles that are available for single purchase that aren't part of packages, so that if there is a particular ebook out there that a professor would like to use, they can request it from the ebook database for the library to purchase. So this is just a brief screenshot of what our ebook for the classroom database looks like. We did screenshots. We weren't sure if we'd have live web access. But the screen before it did have our URL if you're interested in looking later. And this PowerPoint is uploaded to the website, so you can access it from there. We have faculty and student buttons, so the students can also go and search for the ebook that goes with their class, and then we have a faculty button, so faculty can search for ebooks to adopt. We can search by title, author, subject, or ISBN. The database is an SQL database, and we use Apache Solr as our indexing, so it's basically keyword searchable. And as you can see, this is a search results page, when they search for something, they'll have two options. The green button says adopt this book for the classroom. That means we either own it or it's part of an EBA program, they can access it right now. So this takes them to a form that they fill out, that they put their information, what class they're going to adopt it for, and it goes into a spreadsheet that we track, and it helps to populate the students' website. Also, the yellow button is for books we don't own. So when they click on that button, they get a form to request the library to purchase it for their class. This is a list of our metadata fields. We didn't use Marc records for this project. We looked at Marc records originally, but we decided there were too many other specialized fields we need that weren't in the Marc, that we decided to actually pull our metadata from vendor title lists, or K-Bart files, or entitlement lists, which was a whole nother kettle of fish, but these are the fields we picked. Platform, publisher, and vendor, the first column, whoops, my bad, hit the wrong button, we'll try again. Oh look, there's a little red dot. These are our primary key. We combine the platform name, the publisher, and the vendor ID number, which for us is almost always the number from the URL. Whatever book ID or ISBN they use in the URL, we use that as the vendor ID, because typically there isn't a specific vendor ID for these titles. These in the middle are all of the controlled or standardized fields that we have at the moment. As you can see, we have DRM fields. We have own status fields, so we can tell which are EBA, which we own, which are subscription, which are open access. And we have quite a few ISBN fields, so we've broken out the ISBNs by electronic, online, hardback, paperback, because we do have an ISBN search. So no matter what ISBN they put in, hopefully they can find it. And we also have print dates. We have the print pub date and the online pub date. The print publication date actually displays the public, because we think it's important for them to know what year the content was actually made for the ebook. This third column over here are fields that we have not standardized. Some we won't, but some we're working on. Because of the way we load these spreadsheets into the SQL database, at present, we're reloading the entire spreadsheet every semester to update it, which makes standardization of some fields difficult because subject headings aren't standardized at all. So when I go to, if we spent time standardizing them, when we go to load them next semester, we'd have to re-standardize them all because of what so we're working on ways we can standardize subject headings and automate the process so we don't remove our data every semester. But these fields over here are not standardized. So basically the process looks like we take a spreadsheet and we go to the vendor website and we'll pull their title list. We typically will start with a title list of things we own if we can find it. And then we build on it from there. We might have to pull a K-Bart file for certain collections, and sometimes we even have to go to the Marc records to get things like subject headings. And we combine these all onto a master spreadsheet with our standardized subject headings across the top. Then we standardize the metadata that's in the fields, and then we load it up to the database. So, some of the issues we have are because we pull metadata from so many different places, it's not really standardized. One vendor might have only the author's last name on all of their title lists, or on their K-Bart file. The K-Bart file might have only the author last name, but the title list had their full name and it was first name, last name. But the entitlement list had last name, first name. So when you combined all those together, now you have your author field in 3 different formats, which is one of the issues we're trying to work on standardizing without having to re-standardize it every semester. So basically, we get, like I said, we start with the title list, and then we add, if we need subject headings or some other missing data, we'll go to the K-Bart or the entitlement list to find it. So the first problem we discovered when we started this a year ago was, whoops, again, I'm button impaired, excuse me. Where do I go to find my metadata? So I want title, well, from vendor to vendor, it might be different. Some vendors have title lists, some have K-Bart files. They're not always in the same place. Our EBA programs is up here. A lot of times they're on a separate website with their own title list. So you have to run them separately. Some of our EBA vendors give us an entitlement list with everything on it. The EBA and the owned and the purchased, and there's no way to sort it. So we don't know which is EBA and which is owned or subscribed. So we have to go find the EBA list, and we have to do VLOOKUPs and match the spreadsheets to be able to mark which ones are EBA and which ones we own. Some vendors, there's a couple though that are really nice. They've got that field. You can filter it by EBA or purchased, and that's really nice. DRM information is nowhere. It's not on any of these lists. It's in your contract when you sign it. So we have a separate spreadsheet for every vendor in each collection with the DRM information on it, and we just go there and fill that in for each vendor when we load the spreadsheets. I talked about formatting already. The authors can be all kinds of formats. The subject headings are another big formatting issue. Sometimes they put all kinds of subject headings all together with just commas between them, and then you can't break it out because it's not standardized in any way. Missing data is also an issue. Sometimes we can't find it. There's a few vendors we load without subject headings because they just aren't anywhere. And by the time we pulled them, we couldn't pull them from the Marc records because we couldn't find an accurate match point. The ISBNs weren't matching up with the ISBNs we had on the spreadsheets to be able to accurately fill in enough subject headings to make it worth our while. So those are some of the issues we have. Like I said, right now we're doing this by hand. We're pulling each spreadsheet, and we're using a lot of VLOOKUP formulas in Excel and combining these spreadsheets together. This is what our standardized spreadsheet looks like. Once we gather all the data, then we transfer it all over into this standardized template that we use to load into the database. So controlled vocabularies, there are some standardizations we've done already. As you can see here, publisher is typically whatever is on the book or whatever is on the spreadsheet. So from vendor to vendor, that might vary. It's one of our future projects for standardization. We do standardize the platform. We try to use the name from the vendor's actual website. and we use that standard platform name for all of them. The other thing I talked about already is we standardized the DRMs. Over here you can see we have for users and printing and downloading. We have standardized vocabulary. It either says unlimited or chapter or page by page. That way we can, and typically this doesn't display to the public, or it displays to the public, but typically what most people are interested in is the unlimited access. ISBNs come in all shapes, sizes, and formats, as I'm sure you know, and sometimes they're unidentified. So it's hard to put it into one of our boxes, whether it's electronic or hardback or paperback. Sometimes you just have to leave it blank because you don't know where it goes. But we do standardize them by taking all the punctuation out and all the dashes, so it's just numbers. So we only load numbers, and that's to facilitate the keyword searching for ISBN. Titles are another thing we have standardized. If the title comes in two different columns, title, subtitle, we concatenate them together into one. Authors, again, if they're in two different columns, we will combine them. Our preference is last name, first name, and if it's not too difficult to change the formatting to last name, first name, we will. The other problem we have is that there's all kinds of authors in the fields. Sometimes there's 3 and 4 and 5 authors. Sometimes their affiliation is behind their names. So we do try to clean up all of that out of the author's names so we get just authors. And at the end, like I said, we prefer last name, first name, and we can get it. It's keyword searchable, so we're up in the air as to how much effort standardizing these author names is worth, and how it would actually affect their searching. So we're still looking into that, but dates, we do turn all the dates into just years, because quite frankly, nobody cares what month it was published in except us. They just want to know that their information came from 2018. The problem with standardizing is there's this nice formula you can use and it just automatically pulls the year out for you. But it only works if the vendor actually used one of the standard date formats. Or if it's, sometimes they have European dates, because some of our vendors live in England over the pond, and they have European dates on their spreadsheets. But then some years they decided to be nice and use the English American dates. So sometimes you get both formats on the same set of spreadsheets, and then the formula doesn't work anymore, so you have to change it by hand. Subject headings. Already mentioned we were working on trying to standardize them. Our dream is to make a controlled vocabulary for the whole database. Typically what you get on the spreadsheet are the vendor subject headings, which aren't Library of Congress. I know one vendor out of 32 who gives us Library of Congress subject headings. Not that they have to be a Library of Congress. I mean, they could be Getty, they could be anything as long as they were standardized. But there's we could programmatically write Python scripts to search for these subject headings and match them to Library of Congress. But to have to do that over and over again every semester, we haven't. We'd like to try to find a way to not have to reload our data every semester first before we try to do that. But we are thinking of ways to standardize and control the vocabulary for the whole database. The other problem we're looking at is discipline headings. We think it would be nice to add a discipline field in our database that would correspond to the USF courses. So when professors are searching for an ebook in a specific discipline that they're teaching, they could get a list of ebooks that correlated to that. So that's one of our future projects as well. Authors, last name, first name, delimiters. Sometimes there's dashes, sometimes there's commas, sometimes it's hard to load vendor, the authors and have them separated out because the delimiters aren't standardized. And again, we're working on finding a way to do this so we can keep the data once we've standardized it. Titles. Sometimes the edition and the volume numbers is in the title instead of in a separate list. Sometimes, frequently, there's an edition column in the vendor spreadsheet, but it's blank. And all the edition information is stuck in the title column anyway. So we're looking at a programmatic way to break that edition volume number out into its own field. Vendors and publishers, we have a platform and a publisher. The vendor's name is not really on here at the moment. Most of the platforms have a vendor, but then we have eBook Central, which right now everybody knows is ProQuest, but ProQuest's name is not on here anywhere. So from our end, if we were to search for everything ProQuest, we wouldn't find anything because it doesn't actually say it. So we're thinking about adding another field for vendor, just so we can keep the vendor names and to be able to search by them. Our future, as I've said repeatedly, we're working on automation. So if any of you have any wonderful Python scripts that you'd like to share with us or ideas on how we can automate, we're working on hiring more staff. We're in the process of looking for a data analyst and a programmer so that they can help us with these projects. One thing we're seriously considering is breaking out our purchase into subscriptions into a separate database, an ERM database just of our own subscription and open access, because they're more stable. You could load what you owned and standardize it and it would stay. The EBAs change so frequently, you're always removing those records and reloading them, so they're much harder to standardize. But if we had these all the owned in a separate database, we could run standardizations and just keep it. Then when we bought a new collection, we could just add it in. We wouldn't have to keep reloading every semester. And we could build a web display that would pull from the EBA database and the purchased ERM and just display them together. We'd really like to experiment with linked data in this area and eventually try to write our RDF triples for the whole ebook database and see if our searching and discoverability increased by using a linked data display with URIs in some of these fields. The problem is we would have to create a namespace in quite a few of our own URIs because a lot of these publishers aren't standardized anywhere and don't have URIs yet. Vendors, a lot of the vendors, and none of the DRM information. That's typically not Marc information, so it's not got any link data to it. But it's one of our dreams. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of what we've been doing. I can tell you that we've had, since the database went up, we've had almost 300 professors adopt things for their classrooms, which is, in our way of thinking, it's 300 people that maybe wouldn't have picked an ebook before that did. So, and we'll open it up now to any questions. If anybody has any questions or suggestions, we'd be glad to hear them. Well, thank you all very much for coming.